Sława everyone, Sława Bogom, and welcome in the fourth episode of the third season of Searching for the Slavic Soul. If you listen for the first time, in the third season of Searching for the Slavic Soul, I am summarizing the 2 volumes of Kultura Duchowa, so spiritual culture of the Slavs, obviously, written by Polish ethnographer Kazimierz Muszyński. And because it's a summary of a publication, everything I say today is what Muszyński wrote in his Kultura Duchowa. And if I add some comments from myself, I will make it very clear that it is me saying it, not Muszyński. Also, Muszyński studied and recorded the spiritual culture of pre-industrial Slavs at the beginning of the 20th century. So if I say Slavs this or Slavs that, these are the Slavs that I mean, the pre-industrial Slavs. And today I summarize pages 172 to 230, which are Chapter 6 of Spiritual Culture, and the chapter is titled Medycyna, which means medicine, as the medicine that one has to study to become a doctor, not the medicine that one has to take to get better. As Muszyński notes in this chapter, there was a very faint difference between pre-industrial Slavic medicine and pre-industrial Slavic magic, and in many cases it was pretty much not possible to say whether what was done in order to cure a disease, whether it was medicine or magic. There is a special chapter in Kultura Duchowa dedicated to magic, so it will be discussed in depth in later episodes of this season. And here, following Muszyński, I am going to focus on the most medicine-like attempts to treat the sick and the suffering. One thing that is pretty much obvious while reading this chapter is that it was nothing nice to be sick among the Slavs, which, let me add from myself, it seems to be a pattern in folk medicine, a pattern that aims, as it is explained by anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists, who developed something that's called a costly signaling theory. And basing on this costly signaling theory, the anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists, they explain that the aim of this pattern in folk medicine, the goal is elimination or reduction of number of freeloaders. Basically, if you are sick, you cannot work or contribute, and people have to give you free and valuable stuff, such as food, shelter, and assistance. So treating you is costly for your community, and therefore it can be potentially abused by lazy people. So in order to discourage freeloaders from pretending to be sick or exaggerating their symptoms, the treatment of majority of conditions in pre-industrial times involved painful, extremely unpleasant, and often humiliating procedures. And that was done to make sure that only sick people, only the people who really need it, that they get the free stuff. And Slavic medicine is no different. So a fair warning before we dig deeper into the chapter. If you are sensitive to brutal or disgusting stuff, reconsider if you really want to listen to this episode. So, Muszyński, as majority of people in his times, is not sensitive, and in order to explain the internal logic of Slavic medicine, he starts with the Slavic theories of how disease develops. He actually starts with etymology, and from there he gets to how the disease develop. The etymology bit I think is not as important to followers of Slavic native faith, other than maybe mentioning that a lot of names of various diseases are actually pan-Slavic. That is not surprising with regards to names of various, for example, skin diseases, since all sorts of rashes and eczemas existed and presented itself in exactly the same way since humanity developed as a species. So it's not surprising that names of skin lesions such as parch, pryszcz, korsta, or bordawka were used well before Slavs developed distinctive and separate languages. There is also a trend in the Slavic names of diseases that tells us a little bit about the way the Slavs saw diseases. Slavs were really scared of them. They were scared of the diseases. They were so scared that they actually developed a linguistic taboo not to name properly the more serious diseases, because the Slavs believed that using the proper name is like calling in the thing and inviting it to stay. So Slavs would call such diseases nepomenic or nepomenushe, which means one which name can't be mentioned. Or they would call them the diseases mothers, aunts, friends, sisters, or visitors to kind of appease the disease and get the disease to be kind and go away. For example, in Serbia, the plague was called kuma, which means a female friend, or tetka, so an aunt. Same name in Rus were used to name diseases with high fever. Such diseases in Białoruś were called gostia or gostiuszka, which means a female visitor, and the latter form, the gostiuszka, is a diminutive form that gives the name a meaning of something little, benign or nice. In Bulgaria, insomnia was called górska majka, which means a mountain mother. Till this day, rheumatism in Polish is called gościec, which means a guest. In Białoruś, any sort of paralysis or convulsions were called rodzimiec, which originally meant nice or lovely. However, with regards to this name, Moszyński mentions that as he was writing Kultura Duchowa, a semantic shift was already taking place. Namely, the rodzimiec name started to be associated with the unpleasant disease and started losing the nice or lovely connotations. So in his research, Moszyński noted that there was a new name developing, and the new name was icho, which means belonging to them. The other category of names of diseases were kind of pointing towards the malevolence of the disease, but trying to soften the blow, so to speak, by using a diminutive form such as lichodejka, so which means a nice or lovely female entity that brings a demon. And the reason why Slavs were so scared of diseases, other than the obvious reason, of course, which is that back then people were still sane and actually did not want to be sick, which is obviously my comment, not Moszyński. But the less obvious reason was that Slavs believed that diseases are a result of some demonic or supernatural activity, like a curse, for example, and there was an underlying assumption that it is some sort of punishment, some sort of a curse, bad luck, or a result of like malevolent activity against which a Slav had to protect him or herself and the whole community. And Slavs believed that many childhood diseases were brought on by the moon or stars, such as the constellation of Pleiades, which for the life of me I don't know how to pronounce. In the case of this constellation from the first episode, you hopefully remember that some Slav perceives this constellation as a group of hens, And they believed that when these hens are visible on the sky, they ruffle the feathers and all the diseases fell from their feathers on the earth. And this is how diseases develop in children and sometimes in animals too. The Eastern Slavs believed that solar eclipse brings particularly bad diseases, so they hid during eclipses. Many diseases could be caused by wind, which, let me add from myself, is reflected in Polish language to this day in an idiom przewiało mnie, which means that wind blew through me, which is used to say that someone caught cold or sometimes cystitis or sometimes even kidney stones. As I already mentioned in the third episode of the second season, to which I will link up in the notes to this episode, many diseases were caused by przestrach, so a sudden fear, of which I will not elaborate more here, but will send you to the episode where przestrach was talked about at length. Diseases could also be caused by water and by the earth herself. Moszyński gives an example of a farmer from Nizhny Novgorod who told him that if one falls on the ground and sustains injuries and gets unwell due to these injuries, that is because the Mother Earth is angry that this someone hurt her, so she is hurting this person back as a punishment. Other than injuries, the earth could also cause all sorts of other diseases, which were treated by apologizing to Mother Earth for hurting her and giving her some growths as an apology gift. An interesting cause of diseases were worms, which Slavs, particularly in Poland, believed that everyone had these worms. These worms were necessary for us to live. So if we didn't have the worms, we would die. But sometimes there was too many worms or they moved in the wrong way and that was causing diseases. These worms could be causing all sorts of symptoms from pain around the heart through difficulties in breathing to blindness or even toothache. In other parts of Slavdom, the diseases were not caused by worms, but were caused by other animals like frogs or lizards or snakes or tortoises. But the difference between the worms and the frogs or lizards was that the frog or a lizard entered the body to cause the disease, while worms were in the body all the time, and only some of the time they caused the diseases. However, it needs to be mentioned that it was not unusual for a frog or a lizard or a tortoise to enter the body when this animal was still very small and only cause the disease after growing some more and becoming stronger. So one could absolutely have a frog in one's body and be well and only become unwell when the frog grew bigger. By the way, I add from myself, that's not from Moszyński, that the worm theory of disease was preserved in Polish language in a saying zalewać robaka, which means to flood a worm, which is used to explain therapeutical effects of drinking alcohol. So you don't drink to get drunk, you drink to flood the worm that's bothering you. So you drink na zdrowie, which literally means for health, but it is used in Polish as cheers or bottoms up is used in English. As far as animals, cats could also be causing diseases, however not directly but indirectly. For example, in Białoruś it was believed that tuberculosis was caused by accidentally swallowing cat's hair. Wolves could also cause diseases, which, again, this one is my comment, is reflected in Polish idiom złapać wilka, which means to catch a wolf, which means to contract a water infection. From a linguistic point of view, there is a very special type of animal that could cause a serious disease, and this animal is crayfish. it was actually quite widely spread belief that crayfish could enter the body of a human and just start eating it. Such disease was called rak, which is a pan-Slavic name for both the animal crayfish and the disease cancer. By the way, such view on cancer, the disease caused by crayfish, it seems to be pan-European, not only pan-Slavic, since even the English name cancer comes from Latin and Greek names of the crayfish or a crab. But that's my comment, not Moszyński. And obviously a lot of diseases were caused by demons. In this chapter, Moszyński mentions a few, but he states that most of these disease-causing demonic influence will be discussed in the later chapter on demonology, so we will get there too in the future episodes. But there is an interesting mention, namely something that's called poststrzał, which means a wound or an injury caused by a projectile, which is the name of a sudden lower back pain that Slavs believed was caused by a demon shooting or hitting the person with something. Moszyński suggests that such concept could not be uniquely Slavic, since apparently there is an Anglo-Saxon concept of ylfageskot, which means elf shot, and it is a name of a sudden stabbing pain which Anglo-Saxons believed was caused by invisible arrows or darts shot by elves. But back to Slavs. If you look at the Slavic model of a disease, the way of treating the disease becomes quite understandable. Because if you have something in you that's been put there by some demon, a curse, a natural element like wind or water, or is just like excess of misbehaving worms or frogs or lizards, it's only natural that you want this something out of you. And in the attempts of getting this something out of people, Slavs really went for it in terms of both creativity and persistence. The basic approach to a disease was to never give up. It was an approach taken by both the patient and the people who were treating the patient. And basically it was the kind of approach that if one way did not work, then another way was tried, and then another one, until either recovery or death from the disease happened. And it really was kind of whichever comes first type of thing, to the point that Moszyński even wonders whether some of the approaches to most serious chronic diseases were not an attempt to shorten the suffering of the sick person. However, neither Moszyński nor anyone else found any evidence of an actual explicitly stated euthanasia, because all of the treatments served to the patient were presented and they were talked about as cures, even if they involved, say, giving the patient poison or beating the patient severely, or even, in some cases, leaving the patient overnight in a forest with no protection, no weapon, and no shelter. However, there was a very special type of disease that did not have to be treated until cure or death, and that was mental disease, in which Slavs included both intellectual disability and what we know today as psychiatric diseases. Moszyński does not write a lot about approaches to such diseases. He does mention that there were some attempts to cure them, but generally, if these diseases were chronic or congenital, the Slavs actually treated mentally unwell people with a certain level of respect or even reverence. I am going to add from myself that this aspect of Slavic culture is discussed in depth by a Bulgarian ethnographer, Katia Michajlowa, in a book called, in Polish, Dziad wędrowny w kulturze ludowej Słowian, which means wandering beggar in folk culture of the Slavs. I'm going to shamelessly brag here that last year, after years of hunting it down, I finally managed to get hold of this book, and it is absolutely awesome. It seems it's only published in Polish and Bulgarian, not in English, but if you read in Polish or Bulgarian, do try to get a copy, because it's a very important book for any follower of Slavic native faith. And what's relevant in this book, what's relevant to what Moszyński is writing in Kultura Duchowa, is that Michajlowa's book makes it clear that among the Slavs, mentally unwell or disabled people were seen as remaining more in touch with the supernatural or the divine, likely because such people were perceived as less in touch with the reality. So obviously no one listened to them when the question was related to the reality, for example, how to run a household or a farm, but they were perceived as having supernatural powers and more keen insights into the realm of the ancestors or into the future, for example. So they were seen as sort of healers or fortune tellers. And Moszyński describes a case like that. It was a 30-year-old woman who lived in a village of Podowecie in the Skopin district. It was not clear if she was intellectually disabled or suffered from some neurological or maybe psychiatric disease, but she could barely speak and could not look after herself. She was kept in a separate purpose-built hut. She had to be chained to the floor, and the chain was attached to her body by a belt in her waist. She did not wear clothes, and as everyone back then did not wash very often, or was not washed often, so her skin was dark from dirt as well as from the smudging that was back then used as a cleaning method. And she was a very popular healer and fortune teller, and people came to visit her from all over the district. So to you, my listeners, such housing conditions are torture, but in the pre-industrial times, it was literally the highest level of care. Someone took time to build this woman a hut only for her. She did not have to share it with anyone else, which was an unusual luxury back then. She did not work in the field. She did not produce anything, but she was still fed and sheltered for decades. They could have left her wander off and die from exposure or from wild animals, but instead someone took time to make a belt for her from a material that could have been used somewhere else, and even pay for a chain, which was back then was a really expensive handmade item, and that all to keep her safe. And so that was care. And also, let me add from myself, it's also a very good lesson for any morons who think it is appropriate to judge the past by the standards of the present. It is not. It never is. Especially now in the West, when we live in luxuries unimaginable for 99.99999% of the rest of humanity who has ever lived. So, long-term mentally disabled people were not treated till cure or death, but that kind of was only for the long-term disabled or unwell. Short-term mentally unwell people were there were actually attempts to treat even such psychological or mental problems. Moszyński describes it giving an example from Montenegro, where there was a case of a famous warrior who lost his mind after losing his leadership position in the tribal military. And he lost his position to another warrior, and then he lost his mind. So in order to treat this lost mind, he was hanged by his legs with head down. Thorns were stuck in his fingers, and then he was smudged with a smoke from burning chicken feces. And then as the smudging was going on, he was being asked for the names of the demons that possessed him, so these demons can be called out to leave his body. But in milder cases of disease, these kind of, invasive approaches were not used straight away. So Slavs, they had these most basics. I think we could call them first line approaches. One of such first line approach was application of compresses with vinegar or mustard seeds to either the part of the body affected by a disease or to the whole body, if the disease was believed to be internal. The thinking behind it was that if the disease is sitting in the body and we make the body uncomfortable, then the disease will not want to sit in the body and then it will come out. And after compresses with vinegar and mustard seeds are kind of applied to the skin kind of, is irritated and very likely develops some sores or other skin lesions, which is interpreted as a sign of the disease leaving the body. Because, if the disease is leaving the body through the skin, it has to break the skin. So if the skin is broken, then it means that the disease has left. So it's all logical and makes sense. And such vinegar or mustard seeds, the compresses made from it, it was believed to be particularly effective against diseases caused by a curse. Another first-line approach was to induce vomiting in the patient, so the patient can throw up and out the demon, curse, worms, frogs, or whatever was sitting inside him or her. The vomiting was induced by administering to the patient substances that were either just foul tasting or substances that were simply foul, like manure, for example. The alternative to vomiting was causing diarrhea, which was induced with various natural laxatives. And patients that were lucky enough to be assessed as not in need of consumption of manure, they were smudged with burning dried manure, or alternatively they were rolled in or covered in manure. The other option was a kind of borderline magical usage of prickly plants such as thistle or stinging nettle, these plants were used for smudging or whipping or to make an infusion for the patient to drink. Moszyński stresses that the primary feature that Slavs looked at was not what the plant does, but how the plant looks. So if the plant was prickly, then it was believed to be sufficient to make the disease uncomfortable enough to leave the body. And since the prickliness was the point, a meat alternative to this plant-based treatment was a hedgehog, which was used, a whole hedgehog, was used to make a broth, which in some part of Slavdom was considered to be the best treatment for all sorts of internal diseases. The hedgehog skin was also believed to be great protection from diseases and therefore was used as a form of prophylaxis. As I keep repeating, Moszyński is a very honest scholar with great integrity. So he does admit that many of the prickly plants could have some beneficial medicinal effect. So even though they were chosen basing on their looks, they still should be considered as a sort of medicine, not magic. And same goes for the hedgehog, because hedgehog, it might not be a very big animal. Nevertheless, a whole hedgehog broth, like any broth, is nutritious, is very nutritious. Therefore, in times of when, malnourishment was a common underlying cause of many diseases, consuming hedgehog broth might have legitimately been helping patients to get better. Oh, and I forgot, since ants are kind of prickly, ant hills were also used in various treatments. In preparations such as infusions, like a tea made out of ant hill to take internally to drink, or the patient's body parts were given a bath after an ant hill was put into the bathtub or a bucket. And Slavs came up with a lot of ways of making the disease leave the body. There were various forms of squeezing, rubbing, or massaging, as well as beating, burning, or cutting. Again, Moszyński notes that the squeezing, rubbing, or massaging could actually be beneficial in some joint or muscle diseases, like, it's beneficial in modern physiotherapy. Similarly, burning of a wound or cutting out an infection could be helpful too, hence such methods are qualified as legitimate treatments. Another way of getting the disease to leave the body was to try to convince the disease to leave the body, which was done by zamawianie, so a form of magic, or alternatively it could be seen as an oral form of literature, kind of depending on how you look at it. And Moszyński acknowledges that, and he mentions that it'll be discussed later in the book. And in this chapter that we're summarizing today, he only signals that zamawianie was a part of Slavic medicine. Yet another way to get the disease out of the body was to suck it out or to drain it out. And because of that, bloodletting was sometimes used, as well as sucking out the disease from wounds, which, as Moszyński correctly notes, in some cases of contaminated wounds might have actually been beneficial. Slavs also widely used cupping, although they did not use several small glass cups as it's done nowadays, but they used one large clay pot or an ox horn, like the same kind of horn that was used to drink. Also, sauna, both dry and wet, was used in Slavic medicine based on two principles: the sweating the disease out and also making the disease uncomfortable. To increase the discomfort in the sauna, the discomfort of the disease, very often, if not always, while in sauna, whisks or brooms were used, like they were made from stinging nettle or from willow branches, and they were used to whip the body. And Moszyński notes that such sauna procedures were also used as a disease prevention, and this element of Slavic medicine is very much alive in modern times in pretty much all Slavdom. Also, what's important to notice that the first and second line of treatments could be combined. So, for example, as a way of treating a disease, one could be rolled in manure and then beaten. As you know from the first season of Searching for the Slavic Soul, that was a recognized way of dealing with demonic possession in children. A whole another branch of Slavic medicine is, we could call it homeopathic approach. So the methods described so far were designed with the principle of getting the disease to leave the body, but as I called it homeopathic, and Moszyński calls it sympathetic approach, it was based on a principle that similar things are more likely to interact with each other. And basing on this principle, Slavs used yellow flowering plants to treat jaundice, a condition when the human is turning yellow, typically, but not exclusively, because of a dysfunction of the liver. Or they would use plants with which leaves are heart-shaped to treat heart diseases. Or they would use like plants that have kidney-shaped leaves, like such a plant is hazelwort, to treat kidney diseases. Or they will use stuff that's red to treat skin lesions that are red. So, you get the idea, I'm sure. Moszyński stresses that it also could have worked since, for example, some plants with yellow flowers might actually be beneficial in liver issues. So if the right yellow flowers were used, it would have actually been an effective medicine. There is a bit of a horror aspect to the Slavic homeopathy. Since, as you've heard in the 11th episode of the first season of this podcast, Slavs did associate black cats with some demons. So in some cases, on the sympathetic or the homeopathic principle, a black cat was used to treat a disease that was believed to be caused by demons. And most frequently it was blood of a black cat. But in Białoruś, for example, a dried and powdered placenta of a black cat was used as such medicine. Moszyński spends a lot of time on Slavic herbal medicine, but I will not be getting into it since, I'm talking too much yet again. And also, the way the herbs work is universal, is well researched, and you can look it up yourself. However, I am going to list the pan-Slavic names of herbs, following Moszyński's assumption that these herbs were known to the original pagan Slavs and are perhaps the oldest part of Slavic medicinal tradition. So the first of such herbs is malva or mallow, as well as marshmallow, which throughout the Slavdom at the time of Moszyński's research were nearly universally called ślas, slez, or shliz, or similar. And all these names meaning slime, slimy, or having to do with slime. And sometimes there was like a prefix added. So, for example, in Polish, ślas means malva, prawo ślas, which means the right or the correct slime, was used to name the marshmallow. Another herb was aniseed, which again at the time of Moszyński research was nearly universally called biedrzyniec, biedrzeniec, biedreniec, and similar. And Moszyński does not give the meaning of this name, but I did check, and biedrzeniec appears to mean one that is spotty or one that has spots. Lemon thyme, which was typically called macierzanka, macierza dusza, or matere duszka, or similar, and that means something along the line of uterus or the source of life, with the duszka qualifier meaning of a lovely smell. Another herb was mint, which in Slavic languages is pretty much universally called mięta or mełta. And Moszyński states that this name is of Latin origin. However, I looked through my dictionaries and it appears that mięta is actually a Proto-Slavic word meaning mint, so it was used by all of our Slavic ancestors. Then we have the common mullein with a South and West Slavic name dziewanna or dziwizna or similar. And this name literally means a female entity that induces awe. I might just add from myself here because dziewanna is not and never has been a Slavic goddess. It is folklore. Don't fall for that. And back to herbs. Valeriana, which as states Moszyński, used to be called by Slav Odolien or Odolian, which comes from Proto-Slavic odeleti, which means to overcome or to defeat. So valeriana in Slavic understanding is one that allows to overcome or to defeat. Coltsfoot has two names. One is podbiel, which means one that has white under. It's because the underneath of the leaves of coltsfoot is white. And the other name is mat I maciecha, which means mother and stepmother. Moszyński does not give an explanation for the latter name. However, after looking into it, I looked into it, and it appears that the name is also related to the leaves of this plant, because the top of the leaves is smooth, cold, and shiny, like a stepmother, and the underneath is soft, fuzzy, and warm, like a mother. Another herb is berdog, and it has nearly pan-Slavic name łopian or łopuch. The name comes from Proto-Slavic lopeń, which means a plant with large leaves. Then we have common wormwood, called pretty much universally across Slavdom piołun, połyn, or similar. Moszyński only states that it's a pan-Slavic name, but I looked up the etymology and it comes from Proto-Slavic pelun, which means a bitter burning plant. Then we have tansy, known among Western Slavs as vrotich or vratich. Again, Moszyński does not give etymology, but I checked, and it appears that the name originates from Proto-Slavic vortiti, which means return or turn around, which makes sense since tansy was used as a dewormer, so it was used to, in a sense, get the worms to return or turn around from moving in the wrong direction in the body. And then the last herb mentioned by Moszyński is horsehill, which was called oman, which means one that enchants. So these are all the pan-Slavic or nearly pan-Slavic herbs. If you look into the medicinal usage of these herbs, you will realize that they legitimately can be used as medicine, which is also Moszyński's conclusion. And what he says, which I find very insightful, is that it appears that in Slavic medicine, the problem wasn't actually the treatment, but the problem was the diagnosis. If the diagnosis was known, like in case of wounds, broken bones, or say head injury, Slavic medicine was really effective. Slavs were really good at wound management, at repositioning and healing fractures, and there is plenty of evidence from both Moszyński's research and also from archaeological evidence that Slavs knew how to perform trepanning, so bearing holes in the skull to relieve intracranial pressure. They kind of hit a wall though with internal diseases, mostly because their concept of the etiology of these diseases was just misguided, which is not surprising since before the modern science developed, no one really knew what causes jaundice, cough, or kidney infections. And that is all as far as the summary of pages 172 to 230 go. Hopefully you'll find it helpful or at least interesting. The chapter I summarized today is also the last chapter in the first section of Kultura Duchowa, and the first section deals with Slavic knowledge, and the next section we will start summarizing next month. It's about the religious life of the Slavs. And before we end, I would like to share with you my conclusions to make sure that I highlight the most important, in my opinion, lessons from the chapter on Slavic medicine, namely that Slavs did not want to be ill. They did not want to have any diseases, and if they did get a disease, they went to great lengths to get rid of it. Over the last decade or so, I have noticed that a lot of modern Slavic pagans, or rather, as they call themselves, identifying as Slavic pagans, they also identify as having various diseases. And they seem to be happy with these diseases, which from the Slavic pagan point of view is simply wrong. No Slav ever became his or her disease. No Slav ever was happy to have a disease, celebrated his or her disease, or identify himself or herself as the disease. In the Slavic way of thinking, a disease is something that enters the body and needs to be purged from the body by all means necessary. The exception to it was chronic or congenital mental disease, or like intellectual disability, which still at the initial stages attempts were taken to purge this disease out of the body. But if it did not work, the disease was left there to be. However, living with such disease in your body did not mean that you did not have to contribute. Like this woman from Podovecie, a mentally unwell Slav, still had to contribute, be it by taking on healing or fortune-telling. There was no freeloaders among the Slavs, and no one was allowed to stay on disability forever. No one also thought that the system was unfair or biased or privileged in any way. The bad things that happened to you were either a result of your dola, or a result of others' dola, or a result of your inability to protect yourself from demons, curses, cats, wolves, lizards, or winds, or a result of disrespecting Mother Earth, or just an imbalance in the number or in the movements of your internal worms. You just dealt with it. And if you were lucky, your family and community supported you in dealing with it. So, my aspiring Rodnovers, stop identifying with your disease. Just get better and start contributing. Go to sauna, drink some pan-Slavic mienta or lopen. And if your fear is that you can't do much to contribute, just drink some valeriana, which will allow you to defeat this fear. You can do it. It's in your blood. Your ancestors survived being rolled in manure, fed with manure, smudged in manure, and being beaten up while lying on manure. With their blood in your veins, you can survive and overcome anything that's in front of you. And that is all I had to say for today. Thank you for listening. And until the next episode, which will come out in the moon of Linden, when we will talk about prayers, sacrifices, and rituals. And until then, Sława.